I would like, if I may, to take you on a strange journey.
Well, I got a great show for you today with some wonderful weird stuff.
The Great Pyramid of Egypt has been a source of much speculation. Dozens and dozens of theories have been postulated about it. The historically accepted explanation is simply that the Great Pyramid was created as a massive tomb. The evidence against this being a tomb is quite great. Any who has ever studied Egyptology to any degree understands that in the Egyptian mind one must keep an image, or at the very least a copy of their name in order to live on. Now we understand this with very basic psychology. When one dies and we keep an image of them, or even a memory of them, they live on for us. When one breaks up with a lover or a husband or a wife, one of the first things they do is to destroy, or at least dispose of, the images of that person. They wish to cleanse their very mind of memory of that individual, so that for them that person will be dead, they will no longer live on. When the heretic king Akhenaten disappeared, whatever his fate may have been, all traces of his name and image were destroyed. Of course, some survived, but the goal was to destroy all of them so that he would be destroyed in the afterlife. If you look at any Egyptian tomb, you'll find numerous copies of the person's name, image, statues, paintings, records of his or her deeds, and so on. This was the whole purpose of mummification. The statues and paintings and copies of names were simply a backup if the mummy were destroyed. Why is it then that in the Great Pyramid there is not a single funerary text, which we know covers the coffins and sarcophagi and walls of every other Egyptian tomb? Even in tombs which have been robbed, surely the robbers had no way of erasing all of the texts off of the walls. Any Egyptian tomb will be covered in texts. Look at the Pyramid of Unas, one of the oldest pyramids. It was covered by texts which came to be called the Pyramid texts. These texts were later boiled down, shortened, and made into texts that became the coffin texts, or what we call the coffin texts, because they fit on a coffin. Yet the Great Pyramid has none of these things. Only one copy of a pharaoh's name was found in the Great Pyramid, and there is much evidence that it was forged. Furthermore, there's absolutely no evidence that the pyramid was ever broken into. If it had been, why would it have been so difficult for modern Egyptologists to have gotten into it? I won't get into the whole history of this, but if you research, you'll find that they had a very difficult time getting into it, and that there were many things blocking their paths. There were plugs in the way of corridors and things like that they could not get past. Essentially, they had to blast their way into the pyramid. Plutarch tells us that he was initiated into the mystery schools in the Great Pyramid, that it was a temple of initiation. Regardless of how we believe the pyramid was built or what its purpose was, there are certainly a lot of very weird things about it. I will not get here into the shaft of the Great Pyramid, or the alignment of the three pyramids to Orion's belt. That sort of thing is covered many other places. You can easily find that information and make a decision for yourself about how valid it may be. Graham Hancock, in his book Fingerprints of the Gods, travels to many different sites of ancient mystery, and one of which is the Great Pyramid. He mentions that in the king's chamber he saw what appeared as specks of dust swirling in a golden cloud. Now he acknowledges that it's just a trick of light and shadow, but also brings up the fact that many others have been caught up in these kinds of tricks as well. He mentions that Napoleon Bonaparte spent a night alone during his conquest of Egypt, and the next morning he emerged pale and shaken, having experienced something which had profoundly disturbed him, but about which he had never afterwards spoke. Aleister Crowley spent a night in the pyramid on his honeymoon with his first wife, and supposedly had performed various magical rituals of conjuring demons within, and claimed that he was able to make the walls glow, among other things. Of course, there's no evidence that any of this means anything, but it is pretty weird. Now, Mr. Hancock decided he was going to lay down in the granite coffin that was inside the king's chamber. He lay with his head to the north and his feet to the south. While lying there, he gave off as he says, a sustained low-pitched tone. He says that the sound was amplified and vibrated throughout the pyramid. It was very concentrated, and as he says, it was like being in the sound box of some giant resonant musical instrument designed to emit forever just one reverberating note. The sound was intense and quite disturbing. Was it simply coincidence that lying in this spot managed to amplify the voice throughout the pyramid, or was it designed as some sort of loudspeaker, perhaps for initiations? Of course, this is all speculation. Now, here is one of the truly weirdest things about the Great Pyramid. The equatorial circumference of the Earth is 24,902.45 miles, and its polar radius is 3,949.921 miles. The perimeter of the Great Pyramid's base is 3,023.16 feet, and its height is 481.3949 feet. Graham Hancock states that the pyramid itself may be a representation of Earth projected on flat surfaces at a scale of 1 to 43,200. Let's see how this would work. If we take the equatorial circumference, which is 24,902.45 miles, and divide it by 43,200, we get a result of 0.5764 of a mile. Since there are 5,280 feet in a mile, then we multiply the 0.5764 by 5,280, which produces a figure of 3,043.39 feet. Earth's equatorial circumference scaled down 43,200 times is therefore 3,043.39 feet. The perimeter of the Great Pyramid's base is 3,023.16 feet. This produces an error of about 20 feet, or about 0.75%. Now, our first reaction is to say, well, you can scale anything up or down and get it close, so this doesn't prove anything. I agree with you. But we then take a look at the polar radius, which is 3,949.921 miles. Now, if we scale that down by 43,200, we get 0.0914 of a mile, which is 482.59 feet. Great Pyramid's height is 481.3949 feet, which is just a foot less than the ideal figure. That is an error of barely 1/5 of 1%. What this means is that if we were to multiply height and base perimeter of the Great Pyramid by 43,200, we would receive both the equatorial circumference of the Earth as well as the Earth's polar radius, one of which would be off by only 0.75 of 1%, and the other would be off by barely 1/5 of 1%. What lends credibility to the fact that this was deliberate is the number chosen, 43,200. You'll find that 432, as well as variants, are found in many different places. For example, it takes 4,320 years for the cycle of precession to take us through 2 zodiacal constellations. In the Viking story of Ragnarok, it was 43,200 warriors who would go to war with the wolf. It is a legend in China that there was at one time a set of books that contained all knowledge and consisted of exactly 4,320 volumes. According to the Hindu Puranas, the Kali Yuga, which is our current age, has a duration of exactly 432,000 years. Also in India was the Rig Veda, which is the most ancient of Vedic texts. In it you'll find exactly 432,000 total syllables. The ancient mythical kings of Babylon were said by Berossus to have ruled a total of 432,000 years. For those of you with an interest in astrology, you'd probably like to know the upcoming age of Aquarius will end in the year 4320. The Egyptians did not pick this number out of nowhere. It was a number that appears all throughout mythology and esoteric knowledge. This means that a number that has been used over and over again, not a random number. You'll also note that it isn't a scale that's exact, such as 1,000th or 1,000,000th. It's a very specific, odd sort of number that you find over and over again. And if you divide the numbers you find in the pyramid by that number, you get an almost perfect scale of the Earth. And that's weird.
I feel so very weird.